Yeah.
Besties, everybody needs besties.
Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey. On this special episode, we look at the state of construction safety in British Columbia as the Lower Mainland marks the 43rd anniversary of the Bentall IV tragedy. On January 7, 1981, 4 workers, Gunther Kuvro, Brian Stevenson, Donald Davis, and Rijo Matrunen lost their lives when a fly form collapsed, sending them falling 36 floors to the ground in downtown Vancouver. BC Building Trades Executive Director Brynn Bourke hosted a memorial event held on January 5th and addressed startling statistics in her introduction. 54 people died on the job in 2022, 28 due to trauma, and 26 due to exposure to harmful materials, representing a 74% increase from the average number of annual construction worker deaths over the previous 3 decades.
Last year, I stood before you and I reported that 30 workers died the previous year in construction due to workplace trauma or exposures. And I lamented at that time about the horrible and very predictable pattern that we see in construction, that every year approximately 30 construction workers die from workplace injuries. The year before that, we'd lost 28, and before that 30, and before that 27, and before that 32. And this year, as we prepared for the memorial service, I expected to see the same. And I was wrong. In 2002, the last complete year that we have data from WorkSafe BC, 54 workers died in construction, 28 due to trauma, and 26 to exposure.
Yeah.
I really struggled about what to say about this. A near doublet of the average number of deaths in construction. And I went through the table that describes the nature of each of these deaths that WorkSafe BC produces in their statistical report. And I tried to understand how I could be standing here today talking about 54 deaths.
I spoke to Brynn after the event, and she elaborated on her feelings about these harrowing statistics.
We hold this memorial annually, and usually we see that very common pattern of about 30 construction worker deaths each year. And it's something that is, always disappointing and very, very upsetting, but you prepare yourself for. And so when we got the news that it was not 30, 35, 40, it was 54 deaths. It is shocking. It is surprising. And it really lit a fire in us to quest for, why, how could it be this bad in one calendar year? How could this happen?
And what were the reasons it was this bad, if you know it yet?
Well, in some ways, the very horrible and predictable number of deaths related to asbestos exposure is playing out, and those numbers are very high. But the trauma numbers are also extraordinarily high. And when you dig deeper into that, you see, a number of deaths from falls, electrocution, drowning, roof collapse, crane collapse, and poor ventilation, all deaths that are entirely preventable.
Mike Davis, the son of Donald Davis, has spoken at the memorial many times. This year, he implored all levels of government to not forget health and safety as a new push begins to quickly build affordable housing. Brynn agreed with Mike that while building is a priority, safety is paramount.
Currently, there's a drive to build affordable housing in BC as soon as possible, which is a good thing. And with that, there'll be pressures to get projects completed quickly. During the fall legislative session, they introduced a suite of housing legislation to deliver, in quotes, more homes for people faster in every part of BC. While I know that it's not intended to disregard health and safety, I know that it can be misinterpreted by many, and health and safety can be compromised.
I thought it was a very moving speech, as it always is when Mike Davis speaks about his father. And I find too often people forget that construction workers are human beings. That we always talk about, we need to build this, we need this infrastructure now, we need to build faster. And there's a lot of pressure on our industry to build. And people don't think about the fact that there are 200,000 people, fathers and mothers and uncles and aunts and kids, children that are in our industry, loved by families, loved by coworkers who are working in incredibly dynamic environments, right? Where the workspace is changing. You're literally building and changing your environment every single day. And safety has to be always at the forefront, and it must take precedence over any other imperative.
Yeah, throwing people at the problem shouldn't mean throwing them at the problem.
Yeah.
Brynn also broke down the causes of death in the latest statistics, including the twin threats of a toxic drug supply and mental health.
It's really hard to sort of unpack, right? What I can say when I looked at the descriptions of the deaths in relation to that,
Right.
that they were characterized as deaths where a compensable injury was a contributing factor. They described heart attack, alcohol use disorder, suicide, and drug toxicity. So we know how that's playing out in the last poll number, for 2022. We also, separate from that, there is a huge problem in our industry with construction workers and suicide, and also with the impact of the poison drug crisis on construction workers. So it's maybe we started this interview talking about shocked and surprised.
Right.
Not shocked, not surprised that we've been hearing about how many people are dying in the construction industry from the poison drug crisis. We have members who are dying in suicide. Not shocked, not surprised that we're seeing that come through in some of the statistics now being released by WorkSafe.
I also spoke with WorkSafe BC Senior Manager of Prevention Field Services, Susanna Prippick, both about the 2022 statistics and new asbestos regulations that came into effect on January 1st.
Oh, this is a very somber reminder. And if we look at workplace deaths over the last year, both in aggregate, and if we look at specifically the construction industry that was spoken about quite a bit today, the key causes continue to be previous exposure to asbestos, leading cause. Secondly, other traumatic causes, motor vehicle incidents, falls from elevation, struck by injuries with mobile equipment. So those are the three areas that really are huge contributors to these overall numbers.
Now with asbestos, I mean, the best you can do is mitigate if it's current medical technology that we have. But the other stuff is prevention, which is what WorkSafe BC excels at.
Absolutely.
And one of your colleagues was talking during the event about sort of the pivot you've done to address different issues that probably were being addressed before, but not being focused on as much. So we did speak to that as well.
Well, the key thing is that before any asbestos is disturbed, before any work begins, that you really know if there is asbestos and what safe work practices are about that. And we're really excited as of January 1st this year, we've got new licensing and certification provisions. But if anyone is working in the field of asbestos, they really need to take time, visit our website, and look at, do you need to be licensed and certified? There's some great resources there that can really help prevent this from being part of our future. Unfortunately, it's a very, very significant part of our past because these exposures happened 10, 20, 30 years ago. And we're seeing that in 2022, which was the year cited, there was a very large number of deaths relating to previous exposures.
Lee Loftus is a former executive director of the BC Building Trades and has advocated for asbestos reform for decades. I asked him what was good about the new regulations and what still needs to be done.
Workplaces will be better. Workers will know more. Supervisors will be more responsible. And I think those that have asbestos in their facilities will get better service as a result of all of this. There still are many holes. There are still many things to do. I'm not sure that WorkSafe, the Minister of Labor, and industry has gone far enough. We still haven't taken care of asbestos from cradle to grave.
Right.
We're managing it in the middle. We're trying to take care of where we think the exposures are in the middle. And that's great news. But I'm not sure that the piles of asbestos are going to stop being found in schoolyards, in laneways, and in parking lots. I'm not sure we've addressed the underground economy. I want to see what this turns out to be. So as we look forward, I'm optimistic, but I want to be flexible and make sure that we find those solutions to any of those holes that arise. These are wins, and I'm glad to be part of it. I'm glad that the Insulators Union drove this, the BC Federation of Labor, the employers. I have to say that the employers that do this work were on side and are appreciative of this. So there are a whole bunch of wins in this, and we want to keep winning. And if we do that, hopefully we'll see the loss of life diminish.
Finally, I spoke to Brynn about how events like the Bentall IV tragedy galvanize government and industry to change, and how that isn't enough to ensure safety is always top of mind.
Something horrific happens, there is an inquiry, and then we do learn from that and make changes so that particular event never happens again. And there you have a collection of events that ideally never happen again. But there's a lot of people who are dying in our industry from events that are preventable, right? From falls, from drowning, from electrocution, from equipment failure. And those also shouldn't be happening. And those also, we should have learned the lessons of those.
Right.
And a life is a life. A life lost in the Bentall Tower collapse, a life lost in the ironworkers of the Second Narrows Bridge collapse is as meaningful as a life lost on a residential constructions. Obviously, it's not good enough, and we should all feel a fire in our belly. We should all feel responsible for driving that number down, because clearly the status quo, even though it's a particularly shocking year with 54 deaths,
It's still bad.
the status quo of 30 workers a year is not acceptable. And yet we have not moved that dial in 43 years.
Right.
That is what has been since the Bentall tragedy. And we should all feel inspired to do much, much better.
Thank you for listening to this special episode of the Construction Record Podcast. You can listen to our other episodes on Amazon, Spotify, and Apple Music, as well as the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce websites. We'll be back Friday with another regular episode.
Thank you.